You wake up every day thinking you're making choices, that your opinions, your morals, your routines are yours. But what if I told you most of what you believe was installed? Quietly, systematically, and not by accident. You were not raised to be free. You were trained to be functional, acceptable, predictable. That version of you that smiles when esta esse pretendo por dentro, that sits in silence to not make things awkward, that one who never questions why everyone moves in the same direction, even when that direction leads to emptiness. That wasn't your instinct. That was your programming. George Orwell didn't just write about totalitarianism. He decoded the emotional architecture of obedience. He saw that the most dangerous kind of prison is the one you never question because it feels safe. Because they taught you that rebellion is dangerous, but submission? That's maturity. And so you live your life within the cage of what's normal. You go to work, perform your roles, stay polite, play nice. You don't speak too loud. You don't question too deep. You don't act too different. Because deep down, you've been conditioned to associate deviation with danger, not freedom. And that's not an accident. The most effective form of control is not fear. It's comfort. It's the internalized voice that whispers, don't stir the water. Don't be difficult. Just adapt. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted in society. But here's the fracture. When you live too long behind a mask, you forget there's a face beneath it. And one day, you wake up feeling like a ghost inside your own routine, present but not alive. Most people don't obey because they're weak. They obey because they were punished when they tried to be wild. When they asked why, when they showed rage, instinct, difference. So now they don't ask anymore. You were trained to follow the herd without noticing. You were rewarded for fitting in and shamed for standing out. They called it being a good person, but what they really meant was be manageable, be small, be safe for us. And now you sit in meetings where everyone pretends to care. You scroll through screens full of smiling faces and dead eyes. You nod when someone says something you don't believe. You laugh when the joke stings. You apologize when you want to scream. And still, you wonder why you feel invisible in a world you keep trying to belong to. This isn't a personality flaw. It's a design. You were shaped by a system that needed you to be compliant, not complete. And if you felt this dissonance, this ache you can't explain, it's not dysfunction. It's your original self knocking. But here's the price. To become real again, you have to betray everything that ever made you acceptable. So the question isn't just, who am I? It's, who trained me to be who I am and why? You were trained to follow the herd without noticing. Not with force, but with praise. With rewards for silence. With applause for betrayal of instinct. Orwell warned us, the real power doesn't need to kill you. It just needs you to forget that you were ever dangerous. And if this pierced something you couldn't name until Agora, stay. Because what comes a Segir is not comfort. It's confrontation. You didn't want to be obedient. You wanted to be loved. But somewhere along the line, those two became the same thing. Approval became your currency. And so you spent your truth to earn it. This is the weakness they never name. The silent hunger to be seen, to be accepted, to not be abandoned. It doesn't scream. It smiles. It apologizes. It conforms. And it whispers to you that safety is better than authenticity. That being tolerated is close enough to being loved. That it's better to be liked for your mask than rejected for your face. But there's a quiet violence in this exchange. Because every time you abandon what you really think, what you really want, what you really are, just to keep the peace or keep the job or keep the relationship, a fracture forms inside you. Not loud enough to break the surface, but deep enough to slowly unmake you. This is how it begins. You're a child, full of instincts and questions, rage and brilliance. And then someone calls you too much. Someone tells you to be quiet. Someone rewards you for being easy, polite, agreeable. And just like that, the self begins to split. Not because you're weak, but because you learn that honesty costs connection. And connection, to a child, is survival. You adapted. You became who they needed. You learned to read the room instead of reading your own needs. You got good at it. So good that one day, you forgot you were performing. Now you're the reliable one, the nice one, the strong one, the version of you that everyone can count on, except you. Because you're tired, not for doing too much, but from never being enough as you are. You feel it when you're in a group and laugh on cue, even when the joke doesn't land. When you nod while someone crosses your boundaries. When you swallow your truth to avoid conflict. You know the lines. You've rehearsed them for years. And still, you wonder why you feel like a stranger in your own life. Carl Jung warned us, when we trade the self for the persona, we don't just wear a mask. We become one. And then we begin to decay inside it. We become liked, even needed, but never known. And here's the tragedy. Most people won't love the real you. Not because you're unworthy, but because they've only ever learned to love the version that agrees with their comfort. So to be, because integrity has a cost, but so does avoidance. And the longer you avoid conflict with others, the deeper the war within yourself becomes. And if what you just heard feels uncomfortably real, that means you're waking up. You're not broken. You're just done pretending. This is why I ask, not as a creator, but as someone who lives as honestly as he writes. If this kind of truth matters to you, help me keep this space alive. Subscribe to the channel. Like the video. That's what allows esse tipo de conteúdo to continue, not algorithms. People, like you. Now, let's go even deeper. Because the mask doesn't just hide the self. It becomes a weapon against it. You were taught that obedience is virtue. That following the rules, staying polite, keeping your voice low, is what makes you good. But what if that goodness was just a disguise for your own disappearance? You didn't surrender your fire because it was wrong. You surrendered it because it was inconvenient to others. And they called your silence maturity. They called your suppression grace. They handed you a morality built to reward docility, not dignity. George Orwell showed us the terrifying beauty of engineered submission, not through torture, but through distortion. He warned that the real danger isn't in being forced to obey. It's in believing that obedience is your idea, that compliance is character, that not resisting is being wise. That's how morality gets inverted. When you're praised for betraying yourself, when you're celebrated not for your honesty, but for how well you adapt to lies. When peace is defined as absence of disruption, not presence of truth. And the lie works because it feels safe. You start avoiding confrontation, not because you're kind, but because you've equated resistance with danger. Because somewhere along the way, you were taught that to disagree is to threaten the harmony, even when that harmony is built on your silence. So you erase your boundaries. You minimize your instincts. You tell yourself that going along with things you hate is just part of being mature. You trade rebellion for tolerance, expression for neutrality. But neutrality in the face of what breaks you is betrayal. This is the unseen cost of obedience, the slow erosion of your ability to trust your own voice. And here's the paradox. The more you obey, the less you feel yourself. And the less you feel yourself, the more you obey, hoping to reclaim some sense of belonging. It's a loop that masquerades as virtue, but ends in numbness. Carl Jung saw this clearly. He warned that when society rewards only what is socially acceptable, the true self retreats into the shadow, unexpressed, unloved, unintegrated. Not gone, just buried, waiting. But buried things don't die quietly. The anger you suppress doesn't disappear, it becomes fatigue. The words you swallow turn into tension in your chest. The boundaries you ignore become resentment in your bones. And one day, you wake up and wonder, why do I feel like I'm fading? It's not depression, it's disconnection. A morality that asks you to disappear a little more every day, until there's nothing left but a persona that smiles on cue. And that's not integrity. That's emotional extinction. So ask yourself, who defined your goodness? Who told you what a respectable person does? And why does being good always seem to require you to shrink? Real morality doesn't demand your erasure. It demands your presence, fierce, flawed, unedited. You weren't meant to be polite at the cost of your soul. You weren't meant to be agreeable in rooms that ignore your truth. You weren't meant to be applauded for how well you pretend. The system didn't just teach you to obey. It taught you to feel guilty for wanting to rebel. And that guilt is the leash. But guilt is not truth, and obedience is not peace. What they called good was just silent, and silence, in a system built on emotional erasure, isn't virtue. It's surrender. They didn't just ask you to change. They applauded when you did. And that applause? That's where the wound began. You learned early on that betraying yourself wasn't just tolerated, it was rewarded. You gave up parts of your truth, and they smiled. You swallowed your no, and they called you mature. You played the role they wrote for you, and they praised you for being strong. And the more it hurt, the louder they clapped. This is the hidden trauma no one talks about, because it doesn't look like trauma. It looks like success. It looks like being chosen, being loved, being safe. But the cost was your authenticity. And the reward? A life where everyone approves of the version of you that isn't real. You were conditioned to betray yourself gently, subtly, repeatedly. And because it came with rewards, connection, praise, stability, you never questioned it. You started to believe that being less was being better. But every time you performed instead of expressed, something sacred within you shrank. And what you lost wasn't just preference, it was identity. Carl Jung warned us, the self doesn't vanish, it hides. When we suppress what's real to be accepted, we don't erase it, we exile it. And that exiled part becomes our ghost. It follows us into every room, every relationship, every moment of silence where we're alone enough to feel how much of ourselves we've left behind. This isn't weakness, it's survival. Because you were taught, often through emotional manipulation, that your truth was too much, that your anger was dangerous, that your desires were selfish. And so you learned to trade truth for belonging, anger for approval, fire for function. And still, they told you you're lucky, that you're strong, that you're doing great. But why, then, do you feel like you're disappearing? Why do you replay conversations where you said yes, but meant no? Why do you wake up with a weight in your chest you can't name? Why do you sometimes fantasize about walking away from everything without even knowing where you'd go? It's because a part of you is tired of being rewarded for your own erasure. This trauma is not a wound from one blow, it's erosion. 1,000 moments of almost saying what you meant, almost showing how you feel, almost being who you are, but pulling back, smiling instead, swallowing instead, performing instead. And here's the cruelty. The world often loves the version of you that costs you the most. But that isn't love. That's emotional conditioning. And it trains you to stay in cycles that feel like connection, but leave you empty. So when you feel the urge to rebel, to rage, to walk away, don't shame it. That's not immaturity. That's the part of you that remembers who you were before you were edited. That's your soul refusing to be anesthetized. The healing won't come from becoming more likable. It will come from becoming more real, even if it costs you applause. Because applause fades, but the ache of self-abandonment echoes. And until you stop being loyal to the version of you that was built to be rewarded, you'll keep wondering why being good hurts so much. At some point, you stopped explaining. Not because you were at peace, but because you were done begging to be understood. That moment was not weakness. It was evolution. There's a silence that comes from fear, the kind that keeps you small, hidden, agreeable. But there's another silence, one that emerges when you've looked around long enough to realize that no amount of explaining will ever make you whole in a system designed to fragment you. That silence? It's not submission. It's the beginning of sovereignty. You start to feel it when you no longer respond to what used to ignite you. When you let people misinterpret you, not because they're right, but because you've stopped living to correct their narrative. When you decline invitations, not with an excuse, but with a quiet no. Not loud, not angry, just final. Carl Jung once said that the self is not just discovered, it's recovered. And recovery requires space. Space that noise cannot provide. When you stop justifying your truth, you begin to inhabit it. When you stop performing the version of you that pleases, you start confronting the version of you that waits, unedited, unafraid. And here's the paradox. Silence makes the world uncomfortable because it cannot control what it cannot provoke. When you stop reacting the way they expect, you disrupt the script. And the moment you disrupt the script, you become unpredictable. And the moment you become unpredictable, you become powerful. but not power in the way the world defines it. Not dominance, not volume. Power in the form of clarity, of stillness, of choosing when, where, and how to engage, if at all. Most people have confused availability with value. They think that to be worthy is to always respond, always explain, always stay emotionally open. But true power doesn't need to be constantly visible. It just needs to be anchored, and silence, the right kind, anchors you, not away from a world, but away from its noise. There's a version of you that no longer argues, no longer pleads, no longer convinces. That version doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from boundaries. It is born when you realize that some people do not deserve your energy, not because they're evil, but because they refuse to meet you without distortion. And you're done being distorted. You've spent years being generous with your time, your explanations, your justifications. And what has it given you? Approval that costs your peace, proximity that feels like exile, conversations that leave you emptier than silence ever could. You're not cold. You are precise. You're not distant. You are selective. And the fewer people that understand your silence, the more sacred it becomes. So the next time you feel the urge to react, explain, perform, stop. Not because you're passive, but because you're done playing the role of the always available, ever agreeable self. That role is over. Let them think you've changed. Let them question your calm. Let them miss the version of you that answered every call to self-betrayal with urgency. Because now, your silence isn't absence. It's resistance. It's strategy. It's healing. And healing doesn't always speak. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it walks away. Sometimes it says nothing, and that says everything. Imagine a lion. Massive, powerful, created by nature to command space, to roar, to roam untamed lands with presence. Now picture that same lion, painted, leashed, performing tricks inside a circus ring. Not because it wants to, but because it was taught that applause means safety. That's you. Not by design, but by conditioning. You were born with instinct, with defiance, with wildness. You had a voice before you learned to calculate your tone. You had a direction before someone taught you to ask for permission. But the world doesn't know what to do with wild things, so it trains them. You were taught not to bite, not to resist, not to think too loudly. And every time you obeyed, they rewarded you with affection, attention, temporary acceptance. And just like the lion, you mistook the applause for love. But applause is noise, not nourishment. The cage wasn't built with bars. It was built with compliments, with smiles every time you dimmed your light just enough to not make others uncomfortable, with safety that came only when you sat, stayed, performed. And here's the part no one tells you. After years in the circus, the lion forgets the forest. It stops dreaming of running. It stops longing to roar. The performance becomes its identity. And freedom? Freedom starts to feel dangerous. Carl Jung understood this well. He wrote that the most terrifying journey isn't into the unknown. It's into the parts of ourselves we abandoned to survive. Because those parts remember. They don't die. They wait. And they ache. You feel it when you scroll through life as if watching it from behind glass. When you're surrounded by people and still feel alone. When you succeed in everything you were told matters. And yet something inside still whispers, this isn't it. That whisper is the roar you silenced. And it's not too late. But the longer you stay in the cage, the more fluent you become in captivity. The more fluent you become in pretending that the version of you they like is the only one that exists. But the wild doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits in the things you've been too scared to say, in the decisions you keep postponing, in the boundaries you keep forgiving, in the rage you call overreaction, in the dream you dismissed as unrealistic, in the version of you that stopped performing and started remembering. And here's the terrifying truth. You will never feel whole in the circus. No matter how many tricks you perfect, no matter how loud they cheer, no matter how safe the routine becomes. Because you weren't meant to be managed. You were meant to be felt, fully, unedited, unleashed. And yes, leaving the ring means risking loneliness, confusion, misunderstanding, but staying means extinction. not of your body, of your essence. So ask yourself, when was the last time you moved without approval, spoke without calculation, desired without guilt? When was the last time you heard your own roar? Because you are not here to entertain. You are not here to appease. You are not a trick. You are the wilderness they feared. And it's time to remember. At first, the mask felt like protection, a necessary armor to survive classrooms, dinner tables, job interviews, relationships where honesty felt like danger. You didn't choose the mask. You inherited it, subtly, repeatedly, until it felt like skin. It was handed to you every time you were praised for being easy to deal with. Every time you were taught to suppress discomfort in favor of harmony. Every time someone reacted with withdrawal, coldness, or rage when you dared to show something real. So you adjusted. You adapted. You constructed a version of yourself that could navigate the world without causing trouble. Carl Jung named it the persona, a social mask built to function, not to feel. At first, it served you. It helped you survive systems that reward performance over presence. But the danger is never in wearing the mask. It's in forgetting that you're wearing one. Because the longer you perform it, the more you begin to confuse the mask with the self. You start thinking the smile is real, that your silence is peace, that your composure is strength. But beneath the mask, there's tension. There's the constant effort of maintenance. There's a quiet panic every time your truth tries to surface. And eventually, the mask becomes too convincing. Not for others, but for you. You find yourself in conversations where nothing touches you. In relationships that look perfect but feel hollow. In moments of joy that feel like borrowed clothes. They fit, but they're not yours. This is the slow death of authenticity. When you're seen everywhere, but never recognized. When people love your role, but wouldn't know what to do with your truth. When your life feels like a well-decorated stage, and you don't even remember writing the script. And the worst part? Everyone around you believes you're fine. Because you've become so good at pretending that not even pain leaves a trace on your face. You've mastered the art of invisibility in plain sight. But your soul knows. Your nervous system knows. Your dreams know. There's a part of you screaming beneath the surface. Not because it wants attention, but because it's suffocating. The persona has become too tight, too smooth, too rehearsed. And the real you is starving for air. You see, the mask wasn't evil. It was necessary once. But healing asks for something brutal to take it off, piece by piece, in front of people who might not understand, in rooms where you might not be safe, in moments where silence would be easier, because what you hide becomes your prison, and what you reveal, even trembling, becomes your release. There's a kind of power that only comes when you're willing to disappoint expectations. When you speak what no one wants to hear. When you stop nodding. When you risk being disliked, misunderstood, even abandoned, in exchange for being whole. The persona helped you survive. But now it's keeping you from living. So the question is no longer, who do they want me to be? It's, what did I bury just to be allowed in the room? And more importantly, what would happen if I let that part breathe again? Even if it burns the room down. Because sometimes freedom doesn't look like escape. It looks like standing still and letting the mask fall. Rebellion was never about screaming in the streets or setting fire to the walls. It was about finally refusing to set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. It's not rage. It's return. A return to what was silenced. To what was traded for smiles and safety. To what was once fierce before it was manageable. Carl Jung believed that the path to individuation, to becoming whole, demands confrontation with the shadow. That means facing the parts of yourself you were taught to hide. Your anger, your longing, your intensity, your need for space, for truth, for silence that isn't passive, but sacred. The world taught you to fear those parts, to label them selfish, dramatic, or dangerous. And so you tucked them away. Not because you hated them, but because you wanted to be loved. But here's the paradox. Love that demands your dismemberment is not love. It's control. And what you thought was kindness was often just fear wrapped in politeness. Fear of rejection. Fear of standing alone. Fear of your own depth. Soren Kierkegaard called it despair. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind, but the silent kind. The despair of being surrounded by people and still feeling unseen. The despair of climbing a ladder you don't believe in. The despair of looking in the mirror and wondering how much of you still remains. And he warned, the greatest danger is not to fall. It's to never leap at all. You've been trained your entire life to avoid the leap, to settle for the script, to normalize the ache. But that ache? It's sacred. It's the map back to what you buried. And it will not stop haunting you until you return. This return is not comfortable. It doesn't come with applause. It often comes with silence, with solitude, with the disorienting grief of realizing how much of your life was built around being acceptable. But this grief is proof that something real is waking up. Because healing isn't about becoming shiny or perfect. It's about becoming honest. It's about remembering the version of you that was exiled and choosing to bring it home, even if it no longer fits the life you built. Especially then, the rebellion you seek is not external. It's internal. It's not about destroying the world. It's about refusing to destroy yourself to belong in it. It's about recognizing that every time you stayed silent, you weren't weak, you were surviving. But survival is not living. Living begins when you stop apologizing for your fire. And that fire? It was never meant to burn you from the inside out. It was meant to light the path back to your core. So let it. Let the rage cleanse instead of consume. Let the silence become your fortress. Let the truth be spoken, even if your voice shakes. Especially if it shakes. Because the return is not a path of certainty. It's a path of courage. And courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you move anyway, with your hands shaking, your voice trembling, your heart cracked open, but your eyes finally clear. Jung said, freedom is not perfection. It's integration. And Kierkegaard whispered, to lose yourself is the greatest despair. So don't lose yourself trying to be good. Be whole. Be true. Even if it costs everything they once praised. If this echoed something real in you, write it down. Leave a comment. Subscribe. That's how we keep this space honest, quiet, and alive. And when you're ready to go even deeper, there are other videos waiting. Not to entertain you, but to confront you. Choose one. Let the silence guide you.